It has to be much more nuanced. It has to be informed by local knowledge, especially knowledge of those people who are the most likely to suffer. We have one very important piece of information here, small farmers in the rural areas. But also we know from this model about the urban informal sector and the condition of workers there. So a good way to do research would be to really bring these people into a dialogue, into the conversation. And that way it would be a much more democratic, much more open and open-minded approach. And ultimately, I think it will be much more beneficial to the poor people. And of course, we need to think very carefully about what produces growth in specific sectors, technologies, what are the distribution mechanisms, and their linkages with trade and other policies and institutions. So ultimately, if we want to put it in a technical language, we want to create a dynamic, positive feedback loop between investment, including investment in infrastructure and exports, and that is why I emphasized relative openness, because a poor country may not simply have enough internal market once it starts growing. But of course, eventually you have to create the internal market too. That's a further problem. You need improvements in governance mechanisms, but again, it has to be informed by local knowledge and not simply follow the blueprint that is manufactured in Washington and then copied by other regional development organizations. I actually speak from sad personal knowledge in this matter, because I have seen this in many regional institutions and in many developing country governments. It's really a very sad thing that instead of original thinking and analysis of data on the ground, people are simply taking the easiest way out. I realize many of these people are overworked, so I don't blame them too much. But it is very detrimental to the real interest of these countries, and especially the poor people and the vulnerable people in these countries. So we need, and I cannot emphasize this enough, real local expertise and honest application of that expertise in cooperation with people from abroad. So my hope is that these capabilities can be transferred and people then can combine formal modeling with the kind of local institutional empirical knowledge that is vital, and then create policies for enhancing the social capabilities, including the human capital of the poor. And that way, I think we can create a virtuous cycle between the increase in productive capacities of the poor and further economic growth and development. Of course, it goes without saying that you need debt relief for many of these countries. Looking at the least developed countries, this becomes quite obvious, especially in Africa. Also increasing aid effectiveness, for which again we need the kind of local knowledge that I mentioned, and much less overhead and much more disbursement at the grassroots level. And that requires creation of local institutions and training of people there. But this is something that I'm convinced can be done if there is political will. And you need to monitor not just the recipients, which is done sporadically and not too well, but also the donors. You know, why the donors are giving the aid, are their claims really true, how they go about it, how they disperse it, what kind of mechanisms are there to actually make sure that the aid reaches the poor. And then, of course, we need to not forget about the appropriate modeling. We do need dynamic general equilibrium analysis of infrastructure projects as well as other kinds of projects. And that requires certainly expertise of a different kind. It requires expertise that people who are loosely and broadly members of the elite have. But this is an expertise that must be informed by real problems of the people on the ground and it must ultimately reflect the interests of those people. And for that, I think we need to learn how to learn from the people who are the most affected by policies. But at the same time, we have to be very aware of the technicalities of what we know about models and modeling. And only in that way, I think, we can have fully and completely socially relevant modeling.